In the foothills of Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, 3 stones sit stacked inside the wall of a Roman temple, each one longer than a 6-story building is tall, each one weighing roughly as much as 2 fully loaded Boeing 747 aircraft combined. They have sat there for nearly 2,000 years, fitted together with a precision so exact that by some accounts, a knife blade cannot be slid into the seam between them. Nearby, in the same ancient quarry, an even larger stone lies half-finished, abandoned in the bedrock exactly where its builders left it, never moved an inch. This is Baalbek, and the question it raises is disarmingly simple. How exactly did anyone move stones this size, using nothing but the tools available in the ancient world? We will not claim that aliens built Baalbek, that extraterrestrials transported the stones, that anti-gravity technology made the impossible possible, or that ancient astronauts constructed any part of this site. What we will do is walk through what is actually known, what remains genuinely debated among credentialed archaeologists and engineers, and where the honest edge of that knowledge currently sits. Let's start where any investigation should, with the ground itself and what lies buried beneath it. Baalbek's history reaches back far earlier than the Roman ruins most visitors come to see. Archaeological excavations beneath the temple complex have identified settlement layers stretching back to at least the early Bronze Age, roughly 2900 to 2300 BCE, with a second layer of occupation dated to the Middle Bronze Age centuries later. Long before Rome ever claimed this valley, this hilltop was already considered sacred ground, a place where, according to the religious traditions of the region, the Canaanite storm god Baal was worshipped. So if people were already gathering on this hill 4,000 years before the Romans arrived, what exactly did they leave behind? And how much of it can archaeologists still actually find? Surprisingly little survives from those earliest layers, at least compared to what came later. Deep excavation and geomorphological study beneath the Roman courtyards have confirmed the presence of an ancient settlement mound, with cultural deposits extending downward through millennia. But the Bronze Age and Phoenician-era structures themselves were largely built over, repurposed, or destroyed by the staggering scale of later construction. What is far better preserved and far stranger is what the Romans built directly on top of all of it. By the time Rome absorbed this region and renamed the settlement Heliopolis, City of the Sun, construction had begun on something almost incomprehensibly ambitious, a temple complex dedicated to Jupiter Heliopolitanus, a fused deity blending the old Canaanite Baal with the Roman king of gods, built on a scale that would make it the largest religious sanctuary anywhere in the Roman world. The temple's oracle became genuinely significant within the empire itself. According to Roman historical accounts, the Emperor Trajan personally consulted it and was reportedly told, accurately, that he would not survive his next military campaign. How large, exactly, are we actually talking about here? The temple's elevated platform alone measures roughly 95 meters wide by over 100 meters long, raised some 13 meters above the surrounding plain on a foundation that runs at least as deep below ground as it rises above it. Construction most likely began around 16 BCE, after Baalbek officially became a Roman colony, and a graffito inscription found on one of the temple's column drums indicates the project was substantially complete by around 60 CE, representing roughly 3 generations of continuous, coordinated labor on a single religious monument. What, specifically, made building on this platform such an extraordinary undertaking, even by Roman standards? Researchers calculating the platform's full scale have estimated its total volume, including the podium and its underlying fill, at roughly 280,000 cubic meters of stone and rubble, the equivalent of more than 750,000 metric tons of material, moved, shaped, and positioned for a single religious complex, not counting the substructures still believed to lie unexcavated beneath the great court nearby. 3 generations of work on one temple complex, and yet the single detail that has captured public imagination for centuries isn't the temple itself. It's what holds it up. Beneath the temple's grand courtyard sits a retaining wall built from megalithic blocks on a scale found almost nowhere else in the ancient world. Roughly 24 monoliths form the lower courses of this wall, each weighing an estimated 300 to 450 tons, arranged in long, precisely leveled rows along the structure's northern, southern, and western sides. And then, set into the western wall, above that lower course, sit 3 additional blocks so large they earned their own name centuries ago: the Trilithon. What makes these 3 specific stones different from every other massive block already used in this same wall? Each stone in the Trilithon measures roughly 19 meters long, just over 4 meters high, and 3.5 meters thick, and weighs somewhere between 750 and 800 tons apiece, according to calculations based on the limestone's measured density and the block's surveyed dimensions. Set in place roughly 7 meters above ground level, the 3 stones sit so tightly against one another that, according to numerous visitor accounts dating back centuries, a knife blade genuinely cannot be inserted into the joints between them. Mark Twain, visiting in the 19th century, described the site's foundation stones as blocks the size of an omnibus, with substructures so vast they seemed capable of supporting an entire world, a precision fit on stones weighing as much as a fully loaded jumbo jet, achieved without any visible mortar at all. So how exactly do modern archaeologists believe a fit? This exact was even possible using only ancient tools. Roman engineers had genuinely sophisticated surveying instruments available to them, and this matters more than it might first appear. The groma, a cross-shaped instrument hung with plumb lines, allowed surveyors to lay out perfectly straight lines and right angles across vast distances, while a separate tool called the corybates, a long wooden beam fitted with a leveling mechanism, let builders check that a surface was genuinely horizontal across many meters, accurate enough that Roman aqueduct gradients constructed using these same tools achieved slopes as precise as a fraction of 1% over dozens of kilometers. Stones the size of the Trilithon would still have needed to be finely dressed by hand, once roughly positioned. But the initial leveling and alignment of a project this enormous relied on real, documented engineering instruments rather than guesswork. The quarry itself holds part of the answer, too, because the people who carved the Trilithon weren't working alone in some isolated corner of history. They left an entire unfinished workshop behind them, roughly 900 meters from the temple, still sitting exactly where they abandoned it. The largest of these abandoned blocks is known today as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, a name attached to several different local legends, one involving a clever woman who tricked the townspeople into feeding her in exchange for a secret lifting method she never actually possessed. Other versions of the story describe pregnant jinn assigned the task of cutting and transporting the stone, while still another holds that a woman who simply touches the block today will experience increased fertility, a belief that continues to draw visitors to the quarry for reasons that have nothing to do with archaeology at all. Setting the folklore and the legends aside entirely, just how large is this particular stone in cold, carefully measured fact? Whatever the story behind its name, the stone itself is real, and its dimensions are almost difficult to process. Roughly 20 meters long, weighing an estimated 1,000 tons, based on detailed topographical surveys conducted by an Austrian geodetic team in 1996 that confirmed earlier calculations made by French engineer Jean-Pierre Adam. If a 1,000-ton stone was already considered the largest of its kind, why would anyone keep digging in the same quarry afterward? Because the quarry held more surprises. In the 1990s, a second monolith was discovered lying nearby, this one estimated at roughly 1,200 tons, surpassing even the stone of the pregnant woman. Then, in 2014, a German Archaeological Institute team excavating the same quarry uncovered a third giant block, this one potentially exceeding even that figure, its full dimensions still not completely exposed because its base remains buried in surrounding bedrock. Each of these stones bears visible tool marks along its edges, clear evidence of the quarrying process, captured mid-action, abandoned for reasons no inscription or written record has ever explained. 3 colossal stones, quarried and partially shaped, then simply left in place forever. Were they abandoned because something went wrong, or because the project itself was reconsidered before it ever finished? Nobody knows for certain, though there is one clue worth taking seriously. Archaeologists studying the stone of the pregnant woman have identified a significant crack running through part of the block, a structural flaw severe enough that it may have made the stone unsafe to move any further, a mundane, practical explanation for an abandonment that might otherwise seem deliberately mysterious. This raises an obvious next question, the one that has driven Baalbek's reputation as an engineering enigma for centuries. If these stones really were quarried and moved by Roman-era builders, how mechanically did they actually do it? Mainstream archaeologists generally conclude the answer lies not in any single miraculous device, but in scale itself. Brute, coordinated, almost unimaginably patient human labor multiplied across enormous teams. It's worth understanding first what the Romans definitely could not do. Individual Roman cranes, the same treadwheel-driven lifting devices used throughout the empire for ordinary construction, were simply incapable of lifting anything in the range of 60 to 100 tons, let alone 800. Whatever method moved the Trilithon's stones, it could not have relied on a single crane working alone, however cleverly designed. So, if a single crane was never going to be enough, what kind of system could actually substitute for one? Daniel Lohmann, an archaeologist with the German Archaeological Institute, who has spent years studying Baalbek's construction history, modeled the physics involved in moving a stone weighing roughly 557 tons, a more modest example from elsewhere in the same platform. According to his calculations, hauling a block of that size up an 18-meter ramp set at a 20% gradient would have required as many as 512 workers operating 40 separate capstans, each capstan turned by a team of 12 to 15 people, accounting for the friction generated by rollers beneath the stone. If 500 workers were needed for a 550-ton block, how many would the full 800-ton Trilithon stones have actually required? According to this same modeling, scaling the math up to the Trilithon's far larger blocks suggests a workforce approaching 800 people for each individual stone, and other estimates focused specifically on the labor needed to move and seat the Trilithon's blocks have proposed coordinated teams as large as 15 to 20,000 workers across the full duration of the project, when quarrying, road preparation, and construction crews are all counted together. Did the builders at least have gravity working in their favor? Or did they have to fight an uphill battle the entire way? The quarry itself sits at a slightly higher elevation than the temple platform, meaning the builders likely never needed to lift these stones uphill at all. Instead, the most widely accepted theory holds that the blocks were lowered and rolled along temporary earthen banks, gradually descending toward the temple site on a bed of wooden rollers, eased forward by teams working capstans and levers in careful coordinated stages. Coordinated human labor, applied at a scale almost without precedent anywhere else in the Roman world, rather than any single piece of lost machinery. Some researchers have suggested that this scale of effort makes sense only in the context of genuine imperial rivalry, a desire by successive emperors to outdo their predecessors and rival temples elsewhere in the empire, turning engineering ambition into a form of political and religious statement carved directly into stone. But if mainstream engineering can explain the moving and placing of these stones, can it also explain who actually decided to attempt something this ambitious in the first place? And why? That question turns out to connect directly to something that genuinely puzzled archaeologists for decades, something only resolved through careful, recent fieldwork. Evidence suggesting the platform beneath the Trilithon may not be entirely Roman after all. Lohmann's research, published through the German Archaeological Institute, identified architectural features beneath the later Roman temple that point toward an earlier, unfinished sanctuary, one that may date to the Hellenistic period, or possibly earlier still. A pre-Roman floor level, sitting roughly 5 meters lower than the eventual Roman courtyard, was found beneath the eastern part of the complex, along with the remains of an earlier stairway and a freestanding podium structure, suggesting an older entrance that the later Roman builders chose to bury rather than remove. So is it possible the Trilithon itself predates Rome's arrival in this valley entirely? According to this interpretation, the answer is more nuanced than a simple yes or no. Lohmann's own analysis suggests the broader terrace incorporated, rather than replaced, an earlier and apparently unfinished construction project, one that Roman builders folded into their own far larger master plan of monumentalization, beginning under Augustus. This does not mean the Trilithon stones themselves were carved by some pre-Roman civilization using different methods. The stylistic and stratigraphic evidence still firmly places the Trilithon's construction within the Roman building campaign. What it does mean is that Baalbek's sacred importance, and quite possibly its very first attempt at megalithic construction, reaches back further than the temple most visitors actually see. A genuinely unfinished, possibly pre-Roman religious project, absorbed into something even larger once Rome took control of the valley. That detail alone should complicate any version of this story that treats Baalbek as a simple, single-era construction site. It's worth pausing here to be precise about something often blurred in popular retellings. The claim that no Roman or ancient written source ever mentions who built the platform or describes the engineering methods used is frequently repeated online as evidence of an unexplained mystery. While it's true that no detailed Roman construction manual for the Trilithon specifically has survived, this is not unusual. Very few ancient construction projects of any kind left behind step-by-step engineering documentation, and the broader Roman building campaign at Baalbek is well attested through inscriptions, architectural dating, and the temple's documented religious and political history under successive emperors. If Baalbek were truly unique in its silence, that silence might mean something. But is it actually unique? Or does this same pattern of missing construction records and persistent public mystery show up at other megalithic sites around the world? It shows up almost everywhere stones reach a certain scale, and nowhere does that pattern appear more clearly than on the other side of the planet, high in the Peruvian Andes, at a site called Sacsayhuamán. Sacsayhuamán sits on a steep hill above the former Inca capital of Cusco. Its defining feature, a set of zigzagging terrace walls built from massive polygonal stones, each block cut with an irregular, many-sided shape and fitted against its neighbors with a precision that has fascinated visitors for centuries. Some of these stones weigh well over 100 tons, with various estimates for the largest blocks ranging as high as 200 tons, fitted together without any mortar at all, in joints so tight that the structure has survived repeated earthquakes that have damaged or destroyed more conventionally built colonial structures nearby. If the joints are this precise, and the stones aren't even rectangular, how did Inca masons achieve a fit this exact using only stone and bronze tools? Architectural historian Jean-Pierre Protzen spent years studying this exact question directly at the site, and his research, along with that of later investigators, documented something the more sensational theories tend to skip entirely: the actual tool marks left behind on the stones themselves. Protzen identified consistent hammerstone impact marks across the limestone, andesite, and granite blocks used throughout Inca construction, larger pecking marks on the broad faces of the stones, and progressively smaller, finer marks along the beveled edges, where masons switched to more delicate tools for the final precision fitting. He even successfully demonstrated the technique himself, repeatedly striking stone against stone to gradually shape and bevel a block's edge until it matched its neighbor. Why then does so comparatively little of Sacsayhuamán's original structure actually survive fully intact today, if the building technique itself was this well understood and documented? The honest answer has nothing to do with engineering at all. Spanish colonial records openly acknowledge that rather than quarry and transport new stone, colonists found it far cheaper and faster to dismantle Sacsayhuamán's smoother, more easily handled masonry and reuse it directly in the construction of colonial Cusco. Nearly every house built by the Spanish in the city incorporated stone taken from the site. and what remains standing today is largely the portion the Incas built too massive for anyone to easily carry away. A documented, physically demonstrated technique requiring patience rather than mystery, confirmed by the same kind of tool mark evidence visible at the site today. But fitting stones together is one challenge. Moving them to the site in the first place is an entirely separate one. And that's exactly where Sacsayhuamán's sister site, Ollantaytambo, becomes essential to this investigation. Ollantaytambo sits roughly 6 kilometers from its primary quarry, across the Urubamba River Valley. And unlike Sacsayhuamán's completed walls, this site offers something rarer: physical, on-the-ground evidence of construction interrupted mid-process. Its most celebrated finished feature, known as the Wall of the 6 Monoliths, consists of 6 enormous rose rhyolite blocks weighing up to 50 tons each, fitted together so precisely along the temple terrace that, much like at Baalbek, witnesses have reported being unable to slide even a thin piece of paper into the seams between them. But it's the unfinished evidence nearby that makes this site genuinely invaluable to investigators. Dozens of massive stone blocks, some weighing up to 50 tons, still lie scattered along the ancient route between the quarry and the temple site, locally known as piedras cansadas, or tired stones, abandoned partway through their journey when construction at the site stopped, likely during the turmoil of the Inca Civil War or the Spanish conquest that followed shortly after. What did archaeologists actually find when they excavated underneath these abandoned stones? Excavations beneath several of these tired stones revealed carefully constructed roads built from compacted clay and gravel, designed specifically to ease the stone's passage. And beneath at least one of the largest blocks, archaeologists recovered the remains of wooden rollers, physical evidence of exactly the transport method long proposed by researchers. In 1996, a televised science documentary went further than excavation alone, recruiting 250 volunteers, men, women, and children from the modern town of Ollantaytambo, to physically haul a 15-ton stone up an incline modeled on the original ramp, using only ropes and coordinated pulling. The experiment succeeded, demonstrating in real, physical terms that human-powered transport, organized at sufficient scale, was entirely capable of moving stones of this size across difficult terrain. A successful, filmed, full-scale replication of ancient transport methods using nothing but ropes, coordinated labor, and the same terrain the original builders faced. If the Inca could move 50-ton stones across a river valley using these methods, what about civilizations working on an even larger scale, with even larger ambitions? That question leads directly to Egypt, and to the single most studied megalithic construction project in human history, the Great Pyramid of Giza. Built for the pharaoh Khufu around 2550 BCE, the Great Pyramid contains an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks, the vast majority weighing between 2.5 and 15 tons, though some interior blocks, particularly within the king's chamber, weigh as much as 60 to 80 tons apiece. For generations, popular imagination assumed this workforce must have been enslaved, an idea that traces back to the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, writing centuries after the fact. Archaeological excavations since 1990 have told a different story, uncovering a substantial workers' village near the pyramids, complete with bakeries, breweries, and medical facilities, evidence that the labor force was organized, paid, or compensated through a tax rotation system, and reasonably well cared for rather than enslaved. Beyond the village itself, is there any direct written record from someone who actually worked on the pyramid? There is, and it surfaced remarkably recently. In 2013, a French archaeological team led by Pierre Tallet discovered a set of papyrus logbooks in a cave at Wadi al-Jarf, written more than 4,500 years ago by an official named Merer, who recorded the day-to-day movement of limestone blocks by boat along the Nile and connecting canals toward the Giza Plateau. This is, to date, the closest thing archaeologists have to a first-hand account from someone genuinely present during the pyramid's construction. The logistics extended well beyond local limestone, too. The pyramid's hardest interior blocks, granite used for the king's chamber, were quarried hundreds of kilometers south at Aswan and floated downriver, while cedar timber for scaffolding and boats was imported from as far away as Lebanon, evidence of a supply network that spanned a significant portion of the ancient Near East. If the workforce wasn't enslaved, how did paid laborers and simple tools actually manage to drag stones this heavy across the desert sand? Modern experiments have demonstrated something deceptively simple. Wetting the sand directly in front of a sledge reduces friction by as much as 50%, a technique depicted in ancient Egyptian tomb paintings, showing a single worker pouring water just ahead of a moving sled. For generations, the central mystery wasn't quarrying or transport so much as a deceptively simple question. How were these blocks lifted to the pyramid's full height of over 140 meters? Decades of competing ramp theories, from a single enormous straight ramp to spiraling exterior ramps to internal spiral passages, have each faced serious physical objections. The single straight ramp theory, once the default explanation, was eventually abandoned by most researchers for a strikingly simple reason. A ramp gentle enough to drag heavy blocks up to the pyramid's full height would itself have needed a volume up to 3 times larger than the pyramid it was meant to help build, an absurd amount of additional material with no archaeological trace anywhere on the plateau. But in 2018, a genuinely significant discovery finally offered hard evidence rather than another hypothesis. A French-Egyptian archaeological team excavating at Hatnub, a quarry in Egypt's eastern desert that supplied alabaster for the pyramid complex, uncovered a ramp system dating to Khufu's own reign, flanked by 2 staircases lined with numerous post holes. According to the excavation team, sleds carrying stone blocks were attached by rope to wooden posts set into these staircases, allowing workers to haul blocks up remarkably steep slopes of 20% or more using mechanical advantage rather than raw strength alone. A ramp system, dated specifically to the same pharaoh's reign, found preserved in the ground rather than reconstructed from guesswork. Does this settle every remaining question about how the pyramid itself was actually built? Not entirely, and mainstream Egyptology is refreshingly candid about that gap. The Hatnub ramp explains how relatively modest stone blocks could be hauled up steep grades using rope, sledges, and timber posts. But scholars still genuinely disagree over precisely how this principle scaled up to lift millions of blocks to the Great Pyramid's full height. Has anyone proposed a genuinely new answer to that scaling problem recently? In 2025, a researcher named Simon Andreas Schüring published a striking alternative proposal in the peer-reviewed journal NPJ Heritage Science, suggesting that internal passages already known within the pyramid, including the Grand Gallery, may have functioned as sliding ramps for a counterweight-driven pulley system, rather than purely ceremonial or structural spaces. This remains a contested, minority hypothesis rather than settled fact, but it illustrates that even one of history's most thoroughly studied monuments continues to generate genuine, evolving scientific debate, conducted entirely within mainstream academic publishing. 3 sites, 3 continents, 3 independent civilizations, and in every single case, the same pattern repeats. Massive stones, genuinely difficult engineering challenges, and solutions that mainstream researchers continue actively refining, using physical evidence rather than romantic guesswork. So why, despite all of that ongoing, credentialed research, does Baalbek in particular continue to attract a very different kind of explanation? We need to address that directly, because the alternative theories surrounding Baalbek are widespread enough that avoiding them would leave this investigation incomplete. Some alternative researchers suggest that stones of this size could not have been moved using purely human labor and simple machinery, proposing instead the involvement of forgotten ancient technology, energies, or methods no longer understood by modern science. A related claim, often presented alongside this idea, holds that the Trilithon's 3 blocks are matched to one another, with a precision implying knowledge of advanced measurement systems beyond anything available in the ancient world. Is there a more conventional explanation for that precision? One that doesn't require assuming lost knowledge? While the blocks genuinely are remarkably uniform in size, this level of consistency is fully explainable through standard quarrying practice, cutting each block to match a template or to fit a pre-measured space in the wall, combined with the genuinely sophisticated, well-documented surveying instruments Roman engineers are independently known to have used. There is currently no evidence supporting the claim that extraterrestrial beings constructed Baalbek, that any form of anti-gravity technology was used to lift or transport the stones, or that ancient astronauts directed, designed, or assisted in the construction of the site in any capacity. These specific claims exist almost entirely within online speculation and popular media, rather than within any peer-reviewed archaeological, engineering, or historical research. If these specific claims lack any supporting evidence, what is it about Baalbek, mechanically and visually, that makes them feel so persuasive to so many people regardless? Part of the answer is genuinely psychological rather than archaeological. Human intuition is simply poor at estimating how much organized labor, applied patiently and at sufficient scale, can actually accomplish without modern machinery. The same instinct that makes Sacsayhuamán, Ollantaytambo, and the Great Pyramid feel impossible at first glance applies just as strongly at Baalbek, arguably more so, since the Trilithon's individual blocks exceed the largest stones used at any of those other 3 sites by a significant margin. The other part of the answer is more practical. Baalbek's construction did genuinely push Roman engineering to its absolute limit, and acknowledging that real, well-documented difficulty is very different from concluding that the difficulty proves something supernatural occurred. So, having walked through the engineering, the comparative sites, and the alternative claims, what do scholars actually agree on, and where does honest uncertainty remain? Scholars agree that the Trilithon and the surrounding megalithic platform are products of Roman-era construction, dated through architectural style, inscriptions, and stratigraphic context, beginning under Augustus and substantially completed by roughly 60 CE. They agree the engineering required was genuinely extraordinary by any ancient standard, requiring an exceptionally large, highly coordinated workforce operating capstans, rollers, and earthen ramps, organized with a level of logistical sophistication rarely demanded anywhere else in the Roman world. So, if that much is settled, what genuinely isn't? They agree the site's sacred significance reaches back far earlier than the Roman temple itself, with genuine pre-Roman religious structures identified beneath the later construction, suggesting Baalbek's importance as a holy site long predates anyone's attempt to build a megalithic platform on top of it. And they agree, increasingly, that comparing Baalbek to other megalithic sites around the world, rather than treating it as a singular impossibility, actually strengthens rather than weakens the case for purely human engineering, since remarkably similar quarrying, transport, and fitting techniques appear independently across cultures that never had any contact with one another. And what, specifically, is still left genuinely open for future excavation seasons to resolve? What remains genuinely unresolved is more specific and, in its own way, more interesting than the broad question of whether ancient humans were capable of this. Precisely how many workers, over precisely how long a timeline, moved the Trilithon's individual 800-ton blocks, using precisely which combination of ramps, capstans, and rollers. Why 3 separate megalithic blocks were abandoned mid-extraction in the same quarry without any surviving explanation, and how directly, if at all, the unfinished pre-Roman sanctuary identified beneath the platform actually relates to the later Roman project that ultimately consumed it. Is there any way to make peace with that much remaining uncertainty, or does it undermine everything just established? Perhaps that combination, real engineering brilliance alongside real, still open questions, is the most honest way to understand Baalbek. Nearly 2,000 years ago, without cranes, without engines, and without any technology beyond rope, timber, stone, and an almost unimaginable amount of coordinated human effort, someone moved blocks of stone heavier than a fully loaded jumbo jet, lifted them 7 meters into the air, and fitted them together so precisely that the gap between them still cannot be measured by hand. They were not the only ones. On a hillside above Cusco, in a river valley beneath Ollantaytambo, and on a desert plateau outside Cairo, other people, in other centuries, faced the same fundamental problem and solved it using strikingly similar tools: rope, rollers, ramps, patience, and enough coordinated hands to make the impossible merely difficult. Whether every detail of how they accomplished that feat will ever be fully reconstructed remains an open question. One current excavation seasons continue to chip away at, one careful measurement at a time. What is no longer in doubt is what these builders achieved, even if the full story of exactly how they achieved it is still, after 2,000 years, not entirely finished being told.